Okay. Now we're ready to separate the two flasks from the pattern. So we'll take the co-path off first. You want to make sure you leave the pattern sitting there behind. So the vibrator lever is on the left. The vibrator is a little pneumatic piston that's bolted tightly to the pattern, so it shakes the pattern a little bit and helps to provide a small gap around the pattern and the sand so that you can take the sand off the pattern. It's important that you let the vibrator do its job. So without touching the pattern or the flask, let it vibrate for about 5 seconds. Then you'll put your hands underneath the ears of the flask, thumbs on top of the pins, and it's important to lift the flask straight up. The round pin and the round bracket are extremely tight tolerance. So if this binds when you're trying to come up, it'll be this side that binds. So you'll need to either raise or lower the other side, the side with the hex pin, slightly till you feel it come loose again and then come straight up. Don't let it back down once you start lifting it. And then you can set the co-path of the mold on its edge on the side of the sand cart here. Now I got a little bit of breakage in the risers, which doesn't matter at all because they're not part of the finished part. Okay, now that we've got the co-path of the mold off, I'll take my air hose and just make sure that and then we'll do the same thing. We'll vibrate it for about 5 seconds and lift the pattern. And again, it's important to come straight up. The taller the pattern detail is, if you go sideways at all, you'll shave sides of the sand off in the mold cavity. Once you get it loose from the mold, you can stop the vibrator. And you want to be careful with the pattern because it's wood. Most of them are wood and they're fragile. It's your tool. Okay. Got one little spot right here that usually breaks, but it doesn't really matter. It's just part of the gating system where the metal flows into the part cavities. This and this and this and this are the actual part cavities. Here's the sprue well, the runners and the gates where the metal flows into the molds. Okay. So now we'll just carefully take our air hose. You want to make sure there is absolutely no loose sand in the mold, because if there is, that will stop metal from flowing in that spot and you end up with a hole in your part. So you want to be careful you don't get it full air pressure. But on the other hand, if any part of the sand is going to break, you better do it now. So just make sure you get all the little chunks of loose sand out. Nice and clean. Okay. Then you'll take the number stamps and gently put your lab number in the runner, or in the sprue well is fine too. That way your number will be cast into the runner system. Don't put your number in the part. Okay, now on our co-path over here, there's a bunch of sand stuck in the sprue hole, so I can just blow that out. It's pretty easy here because the mold is sitting vertical. And then I like to take my finger and just gently radius the sharp edge at the bottom of the sprue hole. You can blow pretty hard in the sprue, and then I'll take my finger and bring it in the other end of the sprue where I use the triangle for cutting the pouring cup, and get rid of that little edge. And then I just like to make sure I've gotten the mold. I don't have any loose sand falling into my mold when I put it back together. Okay, now we're ready to put our mold on the pouring line. You can have somebody help you if you like. These get heavy. You want to make absolutely sure when you move this over to the pouring line, do not leave the board behind. Take it with you. So I'm reaching underneath where my fingers are going to get the board too. And I'll bring this over, set it gently on the pouring line. And now that I'm under the lights, I can look and make sure I've got a few little pieces of sand in there. Just blow it out. Okay, so it's really clean. Got to be very, very clean. Now on the coat path, I will grab it the same way I took it off. Okay, with my hands like this. Now notice, far away from the mold, the drag half, I'll tip it level so that no sand falls into the mold. Then I'm going to gently come over here and ease it back on. Make sure it comes down nice and slow. And make sure you don't have a gap from the side. Okay. Then we'll take one of these little covers. We don't want any sand. We don't want anybody blowing sand anywhere or anything like that. We don't want any sand to fall down the sprue. Okay, our mold is on the pouring line, ready to pour. Notice we put the cover on here. Now we're ready to take the flask off. So gently open the snap flask latches on both corners, as so. Then you're going to reach around. You want to take the bottom ears of the flask, so you're going to be lifting the cope and the drag half of the flask off together. It's important to go straight up. Do not shift the top block, the cope block of sand, on the bottom one. Okay, raise it straight up. And then put it back on the jolt squeeze machine. Now, very important, close the latches on the flask. The only time you want those latches open is when you're removing the flask from your sand. If you leave those open, the flask will not come apart, it'll jam, and the pattern won't go on and off. So always have the latches closed except when you're lifting it off the pouring line. Now we're ready to set our pouring jacket on. Don't put it on hard. Just let it sit on there and gently seat it with your fingers. Okay? And then we'll need to put a couple of weights on there. The weights are to prevent the cope half of the sand from floating from the pressure of the atmosphere pushing the metal into the mold. It's not much of a problem with aluminum usually, but with brass, if you don't weight it real heavy, it'll definitely float. Now I'm going to sweep any sand from underneath the mold, because if I spill any metal on the floor, I don't want it getting mixed in with a bunch of sand. And I want to reiterate right here, do not put any sand in the trash. All waste sand needs to go into the black bucket with the white lid. But we don't want to throw the sand away unless we have to. All the sand on the floor, if we keep the floor reasonably clean, we just put the sand back in the upper. Okay, so trash in the trash can, waste sand in the waste can, but only if the sand is heavily contaminated with dirt. Otherwise, we want to put the sand back. The sand that goes in the waste can has to be hauled away as hazardous waste, which is expensive, so we really want to try to minimize that. Okay, now we're ready to pour.